Have you ever heard somebody say, just trust your feelings, just follow your heart, just follow your inner voice? While there might be good intentions to give such an advice, and while there might be legitimate reasons to give and to follow such an advice, I believe that the overwhelming majority of those advices are deeply flawed in our current day and age, in which way too much emphasis is put on feelings and emotions, while neglecting other factors which are equally or even more important. Let me build a case for this claim by pointing out an industry which has a history of failing, then learning from those failures, priding itself for having learned from past failures, only to fail again some more: aviation. I will give you 3 examples. The first 2 show quite vividly how dangerous our feelings, our sensations can become when they are unchecked, unbalanced, the one and only considered factor in our decision-making process. And the third example highlights in a chilling way how important it is that we allow somebody or something from outside to objectively reflect back to us reality. We start with the first example with one of the top killers within general aviation, VFR into IMC. Now, what does that mean? There are 2 meteorological conditions in which a pilot can operate an aircraft in. The first can be simply described with you have outside visibility, meaning you can visually perceive clues from outside the cockpit, how your aircraft is oriented in the 3-dimensional space called sky. If you have those visual clues, then you can fly VFR under visual flight rules. That's the one meteorological condition. The other meteorological condition in which an aircraft can be operated in is called IMC, Instrument Meteorological Conditions. This is the exact opposite of what I just described with VFR. In IMC conditions, you cannot visually perceive clues from outside the cockpit. This is the case, for example, in fog or in clouds. And therefore, you have to solely rely on your instruments so you can remain in control over your aircraft. As mentioned earlier, this transition VFR into IMC is one of the top killers within general aviation. In fact, it is so deadly that the average survival time of a pilot who has not been trained to fly in IMC conditions is a mere 178 seconds, not even 3 minutes. This has been demonstrated in a study from the University of Illinois in the 1990s by pilots who were put into simulators. And this study has been retested just a couple of years ago with pilots in Canada. The average survival time before crashing into the ground or breaking up the airframe in mid-flight was just a little better, 267 seconds. Still, not even 5 minutes. The reason why this transition VFR into IMC is so deadly for VFR-only pilots is that they have not been trained to disregard their feelings. When you cannot see outside, your sensations will start to play tricks on you. You will think that you are turning while you are flying straight. You will think that you are climbing or descending while you are in level flight. And therefore, you will start to make inputs with your flight controls which you think are corrective inputs, while in fact, those inputs throw you off balance. And while you are losing control over your aircraft, you do not have the proper tools and techniques to deal with it. You've not been trained to trust your instruments over your feelings. All these instruments you can see here on this picture, for example, the attitude indicator, altimeter, airspeed indicator, turn indicator, heading indicator, vertical speed indicator, etc. They are reference points outside of yourself, which are supposed to help you in your decision-making process and in your survival. This was the first example. Quite simple, maybe a little bit counterintuitive for non-pilots. You know that people might think, this cannot be that hard. If I were a VFR-only pilot, I would survive this. But the studies and also the statistics, which show VFR into IMC being one of the top killers within general aviation, speak with clarity. The second example is a personal one. It was one of the most beautiful flights I ever conducted in my time as a private pilot. It could very well have been a deadly one. To the background. I had planned a local flight around Stuttgart with one passenger, a friend of mine who was about to travel abroad. I had flown this round trip many times before, so it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. However, there were two factors which would ultimately change that. The first factor was that a severe weather front had just passed through the region, including thunderstorms, heavy rain, and even hail, if I remember correctly. All of this forced us to delay our departure for about 1 hour. The wait, however, was absolutely worth it. We were looking at one of the most beautiful sceneries we had ever encountered. The second factor which caused this flight to be an out of the ordinary one was that the tower informed me and another aircraft that runway 25 was in use. Runway 25, which in recent years has been redesignated to runway 24, was unpleasant news for me. For once, because it was the shortest runway available on the airfield. Second, it didn't have a uniform surface. The first 300 meters of the runway were tarmac, while the remaining 220 meters were grass. And third, I had never taken off from this runway before. This would be my first time. So, taxiing to the whole short line of runway 25, those things went through my mind. The one thing I was worried about the most was that the latter part of the runway was just a grass strip. I expected that it would be saturated with water from the heavy rain, and that this might prolong my takeoff run. Therefore, my goal was to get airborne on the tarmac part of the runway, which shouldn't be a problem, given the performance of the model I was flying that day. Fast forward, we had taxied to the whole short line of runway 25. I had completed all the checklists, and we taxied onto the runway. I started the takeoff run without stopping again, because I wanted all the energy I could get. Everything was fine and normal. The airspeed indicator was working properly, the engine parameters were in the green, and indeed, we lifted off before we reached the grass part of the runway. So everything was fine, normal, and as I intended them to be. But here is where things went wrong. I looked straight ahead and saw the terrain rising. Objectively speaking, no problem. The aircraft had more than enough performance to outclimb the hill and the forest ahead of us. Objectively speaking, of course. Subjectively speaking, the forest was way too close for my comfort. And therefore, I did something which you are told early on during flight training not to do. In flight training, you are told to lower the nose of the aircraft right after liftoff, so it can gain some speed and therefore some safety margin to the stall speed. In violation of that rule, I kept pulling on the controls to gain more altitude more quickly. The problem with that is that you can only do this to a certain extent. You know, trading off speed for altitude, kinetic energy for potential energy. And therefore, I started to hear this, the stall warning. It is an oral warning telling the pilot, hey, you are going too slow. How slow? Well, from the footage of my camera, I derived that during the initial climb out, I was 5 to 10 knots shy of the airspeed which is recommended by the manufacturer of the aircraft and the charter service I was renting the aircraft from. To put this into perspective, 5 to 10 knots less in airspeed is a lot when you are already slow and low above the ground. And it leaves you with little to no safety margin should anything else come up which negatively affects your airspeed. The only factors which kept me from pulling further, from getting deeper into the danger zone, were scanning the instrument panel, particularly the airspeed indicator, and this oral stall warning. Those reference points outside of myself are probably the reason why I am able today to tell this story. It was fear, my emotions, my feelings that got me into trouble. Hard facts got me out of it. So those were the first two examples, and I think they show quite clearly. Listening to your feelings in an unbalanced way, where they start to dictate your course of action, can be very dangerous and at times even deadly. That being said, I want to clarify something which should be obvious. Feelings are, of course, not all bad and shouldn't be discarded right from the start. Feelings are real. They are an important part of our lives, and they can be good and helpful. Fear, for example, is something which is supposed to keep us from doing stupid things, like standing too close to the edge of a cliff or walking on thin ice. Fear in this sense is our friend. It keeps us alive. So it should be obvious that it is a day-to-day necessity that we evaluate which feelings are good, which are bad, and how we should react to them, whether or not we should give them room in our lives. The third and final example of this presentation is Air Peru Flight 603. It is a tragic example of how one simple error can lead to the catastrophic loss of many, many lives. Air Peru Flight 603 was a passenger flight in 1996. The airplane, operated by an experienced flight crew, was a state-of-the-art Boeing 757, which took off after nightfall. Once the aircraft lifted off and started to climb, the crew noticed that the altimeters, the instruments telling the pilots the altitude of the aircraft, were stuck. They were indicating that the aircraft was still on the ground, while in fact it was airborne and climbing. The situation got worse as time passed on. The flight headed out over the ocean into complete darkness. The pilots therefore couldn't visually estimate the altitude. Furthermore, multiple and, at times, contradicting warnings were given by the aircraft's board computer. For example, the flight crew received at the same time an overspeed warning and a stall warning. The crew wrestled with the aircraft, tried to save everyone on board. But ultimately, they struck water and crashed into the ocean. 9 crew and 61 passengers perished. Now, the subsequent accident investigation discovered something shocking. And I can imagine that the operator of the submarine had goosebumps all over his body when he finally found the relevant piece of evidence on the bottom of the ocean. One critical sensor, the static port, which is important for the aircraft's computer to calculate altitude and speed, had been completely blocked by duct tape. Maintenance workers had cleaned the aircraft before the flight, covered the static port with duct tape in order to protect it, and forgotten to remove it. And this mistake was neither detected by any of the maintenance workers, nor by the inspector, nor by the supervisor, nor by the flight crew. Now, for the first two examples, the bottom line was pretty straightforward. Don't trust your heart. Don't trust your feelings as a sole reference point. Be on the lookout for external and reliable ones, which can help you to determine truth, which can help you to survive. The third example partially shares the bottom line of the first two, but it even goes further. The pilots of Air Peru Flight 603 knew that something was wrong with their aircraft. They realized that the instruments, which they had been trained to trust over their sensations, were unreliable. And therefore, they asked for help from another source, which they deemed to be more reliable than their instruments. They asked ATC, Air Traffic Control, to provide them with information regarding speed and altitude. And the controller, he tried to help them. He gave them the ground speed, which helped the crew. But tragically, he couldn't provide the flight crew with accurate information about the one thing which finally doomed everyone on board: the altitude. The only value he could read back to the crew, which he could affirm to the crew, was the value the aircraft itself was transmitting as altitude information through the transponder. And this value was, of course, false, because the aircraft's board computer itself was confused about its altitude. Before we finish this presentation by thinking about how the aviation industry is currently cultivating lots of fertile ground for new and even more tragic mistakes in the future, let us try to learn from the past, from those 3 examples I just shared with you. For once, personally, and as a result of that, hopefully as societies as a whole. Within societies around the world, especially Western ones, there is a minority group called the LGBTQ movement. You have certainly heard about it because it is quite loud, colorful, and attention-seeking. Maybe you have not only heard about it, but you are even a part of it. If that is the case, I hope that you will take the rest of this presentation as it is supposed to be taken, as a benevolent letter from a friend. The people within the LGBTQ movement are, of course, not all the same. It is quite easy to distinguish at least 2 different subgroups within that movement. The first subgroup is comprised out of people who would say, I know who I am, I know what my identity is. In fact, those are the pronouns by which you are allowed to address me. You don't get to tell me otherwise. And even though the LGBTQ community claims to be a movement which is all about love, this first subgroup within that community oftentimes demonstrates the very opposite to those who, in a direct but loving way, try to get them to rethink their position with facts and reasoning. That's the first subgroup. They are, to build the bridge to the first of those 3 examples I shared with you previously, they are like VFR-only pilots who knowingly and willingly fly into conditions which are dangerously close to IMC or IMC already. It has been established for a long time now that the LGBTQ lifestyle is unhealthy for both body and soul. Especially the transgender movement, which I will touch upon more later, exhibits this on a massive scale. So they knowingly and willingly fly into those dangerous conditions. And if you approached them to reason with them, they would be saying, well, it's going to be fine. I trust my feelings, they matter to me the most. And therefore, they would be saying, more or less consciously, I don't care that much about facts. I don't care that much about reliable reference points outside of myself. Furthermore, to build the bridge to the second example, people within this first subgroup of the LGBTQ community are like pilots who get themselves dangerously close to a stalling condition because of their feelings, while reliable reference points outside of themselves are screaming at them, trying to get them back into a safe position. Despite of all the warnings, they refuse to lower the nose of their aircrafts. Side note: a person pointing his or her nose into the sky shows a distinct sign of pride. Therefore, I think this illustration fits nicely for the so-called pride movement as well. And finally, the bridge to the third example. People within this first subgroup of the LGBTQ community are like pilots who refuse to ask for help, even though they have one alarm after the other going off inside the cockpit, indicating that they have a serious problem, a sensor problem. This sensor problem, again, fits nicely into this illustration as well. The trauma theory, which I believe to be beyond the stage of being a theory, is well established by many prominent examples and official statistics. According to this trauma theory, many people within the LGBTQ community are part of it because of traumatic experiences in their childhood. Those traumatic experiences can be parents who were absent, parents who had switched roles, sexual abuse, at home, in school, in churches by quote-unquote priests, or wherever it might have been, bullying, loneliness, etc. And those traumas significantly increase the chances for abnormal, unnatural sexual desires, which, in many areas, negatively affect the future of the lives involved. So, if we use this picture of us all being pilots, of us all navigating the beauties and also the challenges of life, like real pilots have to navigate their aircrafts through the sky, then the people within this first subgroup of the LGBTQ community are like pilots who willingly refuse to learn from the past, from past mistakes of other pilots who didn't balance feelings with facts, from past mistakes of other pilots who didn't appreciate reliable reference points outside of themselves. They also willingly refuse to learn from positive examples of other pilots who showed a healthy amount of skepticism and who were not too proud to admit that they are in desperate need of help. They willingly refuse to learn from the past. When you see them engaging in arguments and discussions, it becomes very clear that their worldview is, for the most part, a one-sided one. Everything is argued for or against from an emotional point of view. In the short or the long run, this will most certainly end up in disaster. So this was the first subgroup. The second subgroup within the LGBTQ community is comprised out of people who are on the verge of entering into this community, or they have done so already. But contrary to this first subgroup, they are seeking. They are consciously or subconsciously crying out, "I have a problem. Can somebody please help me?" Like those pilots in the third example, Air Peru Flight 603. They knew that they had a problem, and therefore they asked for help. They wanted to get out of the situation. They had gotten into the situation because of a mistake, because of a blocked sensor. And this blocked sensor kicked off a chain reaction, resulting in questions for those pilots like, what is our altitude? What is our airspeed? For someone within this second subgroup of the LGBTQ community, the questions might be, who am I? What is my identity? What are the safe boundaries, the guardrails, the hard facts for my life? Some of the most fundamental questions a person can ask. And how those questions are answered or not answered can make the difference between life and death, just like in the case of Air Peru Flight 603. My heart goes out to both people groups within the LGBTQ community, also because of personal reasons, which I will share with you in the end of this presentation. But it goes out even more to those people within the second subgroup, to those who are asking for help. If people desperately ask for help, it should be a given that they get help beyond superficial answers like, just trust your feelings, just follow your heart, just follow your inner voice. Otherwise, it would be like the air traffic controller for Air Peru Flight 603 telling the pilots, your airspeed shows 0, even though you are clearly flying. Okay, I affirm you. Your altitude shows 0, even though you are clearly flying. Okay, I affirm you. In fact, do whatever you feel like doing. I will support you no matter what. Just follow your heart. Everybody would say that such an advice is foolish and even criminal. But when we come to ordinary people, especially young, easily manipulated children who have been utterly confused by our insane societies, many say exactly this. We affirm you. Trust your feelings, follow your heart. And especially this already mentioned letter T within the LGBTQ movement, which stands for transgender, is the reason why I am so passionate about the subject. Because there is a critical sense of urgency here. Children who are not yet allowed to drink alcohol, smoke cigarettes, get a tattoo, or even just rent a simple hotel room by themselves are encouraged to take puberty blockers, undergo hormone therapy, and even gender reassignment surgery. They are encouraged to step onto a path which will ruin, often irrevocably, an entire area of their lives, for the rest of their lives. The facts are clear. Many transitioners later on regret their choice and detransition, only to be met by the harsh reality that certain choices cannot be reversed. The consequences of this realization, which came too late, can be devastating. And if facts cannot get through to you, my dear friend, maybe look at a couple of personal stories which might be able to reach you on an emotional level. There are faces and personal stories behind the numbers and statistics. As mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, the aviation industry as a whole prides itself with the claim that it has learned from past mistakes and that subsequently flying has become the safest way of traveling in the world. And obviously, it is a good thing that aviation has this powerful testimony. But with such a powerful testimony comes also one thing: responsibility. Responsibility not only in the flight operations and how they are conducted, but also, since many look with admiration towards the aviation industry, in what is communicated towards the world to see. And therefore, I find it all the more irresponsible of many well-known and respected airlines to push this LGBTQ agenda, this brokenness, the way they do. Couple of examples on the screen for you to see. Everyone who walks this earth with their eyes open and a critical, functioning mind knows about the consequences if big international companies do not align with the woke agenda. Social consequences, financial consequences, the list is probably longer and more severe than I am aware of. So we at least partially know that. And therefore we at least partially understand the pressures airlines are under. Still, airlines have a history, an expertise, and therefore they have a responsibility towards humanity. Cheering on people on their road to destruction, while they could encourage them to think critically, to appreciate facts, to balance feelings with reality, is in my eyes not only negligence. It is, in German it's called unterlassene Hilfeleistung. It is a failure to provide essential assistance. And at least in Germany, this is criminal. A person could be sent to jail for this. Here is my appeal to those individuals in the aviation industry who promote, wave through, or even just tolerate this life-wrecking ideology. I hope that you will learn from this failure, from this gigantic mistake you are currently undertaking someday soon. That you will finally take your responsibility towards society as seriously as you take your flight operations seriously. And I hope that you will try to make it up to those people you've hurt. The LGBTQ agenda and the message of quote-unquote love that crosses all borders might sound nice on paper. But if you just scratch the surface ever so slightly and are open for the truth, are open to where this would ultimately lead us, namely to the abolition of all sound and healthy boundaries around permissible sexual conduct, then you will see the massive problems with it. Sadly, the aviation industry is not the only entity in which individuals and entire people groups act irresponsibly in this matter. We could talk for hours about people who introduce this life-wrecking ideology into schools, into kindergartens, and even before that, into kitas, children daycare centers, by smuggling innocent-looking books into libraries, by hosting and promoting drag queen story hours, by teaching it as something normal and natural. And we could furthermore talk about the even more irresponsible behavior of quote-unquote Christians who cheer on broken people on pride parades. The irresponsible behavior of quote-unquote pastors and reverends who introduce this life-wrecking ideology on adults and even children within the church. Quote-unquote ministers of the gospel who should take the Bible as their guideline. The Bible which is very clear about the subject. I would love to talk about all of this some more, but I want to keep this video somewhat short. On the screen you have seen lots of material to get yourself started if you are in need of helpful resources. The respective links you will find in the description box as well. In closing, I want to take my responsibility seriously and share with you from the mistakes that I have made in the past, so you can hopefully learn from them as well. Growing up, aviation meant the world to me. It was a big idol in my life, and I defined, at least in part, my identity and also my self-worth through my ability to perform in this occupation. This is not the place to share with you in detail why and how this happened, because it would take too much time. However, if you are interested in this background, you can read chapter 14 of my book, Destination Unknown. It is freely available on my website. Here and now, I will only say this much. Aviation becoming an idol in my life also had a lot to do with traumas from my childhood. To define your identity and also your self-worth through someone or something here on this earth is a dangerous thing to do. Let us conduct a little thought experiment here. Let's say you define your identity and also your self-worth through what society as a whole tells you. That would be disastrous, wouldn't it? In one region and one period of history, you might be on top of the world, while in another region and another period of history, you might be treated like garbage, as disposable. Maybe because you're deemed to be a form of life that hasn't evolved sufficiently. As you are certainly aware, we once had a guy here in Germany who used, among others, this very argument to justify his genocidal ideas against the Jews, and who convinced large parts of the population about this nonsense. So society as a whole cannot tell you your identity and your self-worth, because it is not reliable. History testifies to that fact. Let's say you define your identity and also your self-worth through how you look like, or what you can achieve in life, your ability to perform. That would be disastrous as well, wouldn't it? Because if you lived to see old age, you would be worth less compared to where you were in the prime of your life. As you are certainly aware, we once had a guy here in Germany who convinced many people that the elderly and the sick are disposable because they are a burden to society. I think you can see where I'm going with this. So, where can we find identity, self-worth, meaning of life? All those things which are indispensable for a functioning worldview and subsequently healthy human beings. You can find the answers to those questions where I found them, in a reliable and well-attested reference point outside. Not only outside of yourself, but outside of creation, in a relationship with a God who created you, who wants to have fellowship with you. He can tell you who you are, what your identity is. And he not only tells you how much you are worth to him, but he already demonstrated it 2000 years ago. He was willing to pay a tremendous price so you could be forgiven of your sins. He sent his only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross for you. He sacrificed himself for you. This is true love. This is self-sacrificial love. This is a reference point outside of yourself that is unshakable, trustworthy, reliable. This is where I found real peace, also about aviation. I found peace about the fact that I would never be able to fly commercially because of health reasons. I even found peace at some point to quit flying altogether. That doesn't mean, of course, that there aren't still days when I look to the sky with a heart that is kind of heavy. That doesn't mean, of course, that I don't have questions anymore why this happened, why I wasn't allowed to pursue my passion. But it does mean, for once, that this heaviness has reduced significantly over the years. And it does also mean that I have more answers now to the questions, to the probable reasons why, than I had 10 years ago. Aviation is not what defines me. And it most certainly does not provide me with the answers to the really important questions in life. So again, I found my peace in God. And I'm absolutely positive you can find it there as well. It doesn't matter what you are struggling with, whether it is a past with abusive parents who may have even abandoned you, whether it is a past with major psychological problems and time spent in prison for attempted murder, whether it is a past full of violence as a gang member or even worse, a gang leader, whether it is a past in an extreme religious system which has brought you to the brink of suicide. It does not matter. He is big enough so he can enable you to overcome it. There are so many beautiful testimonies, also from the LGBTQ community, which testify to that fact. God bless you, my friend. Whoever you are, whatever your sexual orientation might be, whatever your struggle might be, I pray that we all learn from the past, that we all lay aside our pride and ask for help from the one source that can truly lead us to the fullness of life. God bless you.